I'm back. Welcome to chapter 3 in the perception process. I'm in a new syllabus shirt. My supervisors keep getting me them in different colors because they know how serious I take the syllabus. Have you read it yet? So we're going to be coming back to chapter 2. I like chapter 2 very much. It's about models. Students have given me feedback that it wasn't the most exciting chapter. So after receiving that feedback, one of the things I decided to do many years back was start with a chapter that they like much more, which is perception, which is why we're jumping to chapter 3, and I promise we'll come back to chapter 2. So as a reminder, if you can't see on my flat screen very well, in Blackboard I have all my PowerPoint notes up, and it might be helpful if you put that on another screen as we go through it. So in chapter 3, perception, there's 3 main themes in it. It is select, organize, and interpret. One of the things that you're going to find over the course of the next 7.5 weeks is I'm always looking to help students study a little bit better. And in terms of acronyms, when you're looking to take a test, which we'll go over later in the semester, the ways that you can remember things are very often mnemonic devices. So for instance, if you take the first letter of each one of these, it makes, it's supposed to be a soybean, spelled a little differently, but you can remember this by soy, select, organize, and interpret. So what the chapter does is break down each part of this. So you could tell from the clip art, if you've ever tried to say, choose a new room color. So if you go to the store and you're looking at all different colors, you select. We do that all the time in terms of what we pay attention to, and we're going to hit that on the next slide. The next one is in terms of organization. So I don't know if people still play Tetris, but the way that we organize our frameworks to help make sense of our worlds. And the last one, I don't know if you can tell who this guy is. Feel free to scream it out. I won't hear it along with you. But you might recognize him as Bob Ross. It's funny, as I talked about on Blackboard, I've been teaching for 20 years, and there was a time in my career that not everyone knew who Bob Ross was, and evidently he now has a show on Netflix that people watch. So you can watch him there. Just so you know, I'm not going to be playing videos probably in these mini lectures, but I do want to tell you where they're embedded. If you click on this in the regular PowerPoint, it's going to take you to Bob Ross painting some happy trees, and then there's happy accidents in there. And we'll talk about more of that in interpretation. The different ways that something might add up differently from one person to the next. So the next part of the chapter breaks down different components when we select information. So one of the jargon terms, jargon are the things that are in bold, that they're using is the word salient. So the things that we pay most attention to. So for instance, in Blackboard, everything that I have up on the left where I'm saying, check out this first, make sure you look at this. I highlight different things in the syllabus. We are always noticing different things that are most important. And there's a few different ways that we do that. One of them is by what's visually, so what we see, or orally, what we hear that's stimulating. So for instance, when we do all these online classes, you might find that your professors organize it differently. It might be that some clip art is just better than others. It might be that the cadence to my voice is just so annoying or so fantastic that you pay more attention to it in certain parts. You know, it's the same kind of thing when you're driving. If you see a flashing sign or you see lights behind you, all those kinds of things make a difference in what we pay attention to. In the next part, in terms of needs and interests, it might be that the way you pick classes here at Suffolk. It might be that you were going through the schedule and you saw a class that looked really interesting. For other people, it might be, okay, I need a class to graduate. So a lot of times what happens is we pay attention to things based on needs and interests, and a lot of times that could change over time. The textbook gives an example that if we always do it by interest, that might be how we're scrolling through social media and we waste a lot of time on it. It might be interesting, but it may not always be helpful. It might be, if you're taking something in a history class, you find it so interesting. Maybe you didn't have a lot of interest going into it, but as the classes went on, and you found that you were paying so much attention to it. And then the last one is expectations. It's interesting. I got a few emails before the semester started asking about what this class would include. So even though people saw the description for it, they wanted even more information, and I write back, as you're seeing now on Blackboard, with all my smiley face emoticons saying it's going to be fast-paced, but you're totally going to get through it. Those kinds of things, when they meet our expectations, or sometimes if something feels overwhelming, that's the way we pay attention to. So these are the three different parts of select information. Remember, I have something up in Blackboard for Q&A. Anytime you ever want to ask me a question, you can always do that in discussion forum. And remember, I do Zoom office hours too. All that information, where is it? In the syllabus. When we move next into step 2 on organizing information, they talk about it in 3 terms of proximity, similarity, and difference. So what we mean by proximity is literally how close we are to something. So for instance, if you were ever driving around in your neighborhood and you were looking for a friend's house and you remembered certain streets but you went on the wrong block. It might be if you are sitting in a classroom and you remember what place to go to because it was the same place in Asheroken Hall, or if you were in Comset Hall, whatever it might have been. So the way that we often organize information is literally by how close something is. So I tell students a lot of the time, if it's something like psychology and sociology, a lot of times that information that we read about in textbooks are very, very similar. It leads exactly into the next one. So we might highlight in one class and put it in, I know I like to color code things. For other people, when they're organizing information, you could think about even if you like to write notes right along with this chapter, if you're highlighting in Top Hat, all the time when we do things, we find different patterns that work for us. The last one that it talks about is in terms of we organize what's different. And a lot of times that's what gets us in trouble with things. The truth is, it is automatic. I think one of the things that helps a lot in this class is we rethink our patterns of how we organize. So what a perceptual error is when we take in information and we make a mistake because we just automatically think, say, someone would do something the same way that we would. So for instance, if somebody hasn't returned your text message in an hour and you are glued to your phone and you get back to people really fast, it might be a perceptual error of you think that person is ignoring you when meanwhile, maybe their phone is in the other room. For instance, anybody who might be texting me right now, I'm not getting back for a while because my camera is on a tripod behind my computer. It's recording me right now. So you get the lecture. In terms of punctuation, this one is probably the most interesting, at least to me, of all of it. That is where we think something starts and where something ends, so cause and effect. So like I was saying in the last video, one of the things that we're going to be getting into is conflict. And a lot of times the way we organize information comes from punctuation differences. So for instance, they give an example in the chapter of 2 folks who were working together on a project, and Linda emailed Bill over the weekend 3 times. He never got back to her. So Monday morning when Linda comes in, she is pretty annoyed at Bill because he hasn't answered. So her conflict has started over the weekend, not getting any replies. Well, it turns out Bill was camping and he unplugged. He had no idea there was an issue and he was ready to get started on things Monday morning. So think about in terms of communication patterns Especially, you might want to think about the last person that you might have had a problem with. It might be that both of you had different ideas of where a problem started and ended. And that's usually where we can make things better. And that's usually what this class is used for too. That intrapersonal and interpersonal part about the intro where we reflect, and then the inter where we talk and make things better. In terms of the last stage of interpreting information, we do this in two main ways. The first one is schemata, and the second one is cognitive complexity, and of course we'll define those terms. When we're talking about schemata, hopefully you're getting used to the really good or maybe really bad clip art. We're talking about a script, how we think things are supposed to go. So, for instance, oh wow, if you were at Suffolk last semester, or maybe you were at another school, or who knows, maybe you were in high school at the time, when Corona struck, everything switched for everybody all along the country. So what we knew about school, everything got turned upside down. And any script that we had, especially if we were in the semester and we were halfway done, it was really turned on its head. It might even be right now. You might have signed up for an online course, and it might be you're expecting it to go exactly the way that it went last semester for you. And who knows, it might. I don't know what classes that you're in. You might find that this is completely meeting your expectations. It might be if you were at Suffolk, or again, it might have been another school, you might have video conference. That's what I did with my students. We Zoomed, and then I had lectures up as well. But what's interesting about it is we didn't have a schemata for how things were supposed to go after spring break, right? We figured it out, and we certainly got it done. I know I made another syllabus after we were a couple weeks into it, but everything was different. And one of the things that makes us so successful as communicators is our ability to update these things and then adapt. And we'll move into that with a cognitive complexity. Typically when I'm in class, everybody wants to know what all the articles are about, so I will just tell you even if you're not asking. So Gary Sanchez played for the Yankees. I will tell you, I grew up a Mets fan. Game 6, 86, I was at it when the ball went through Buckner's legs. But in terms of what Gary Sanchez is on the screen for, a couple of years back, there was a news article about him, and they were saying that he didn't hustle on a play. And we were talking about this in class. And it was interesting because in the article, and what other students had agreed to, was that everybody watched Sanchez hustle throughout his career. He was actually nursing a groin injury, and that's why he wasn't moving quite as fast. So there were different interpretations of it based on how familiar people were with his playing style. It was interesting when we had that talk about it in class, and we could continue on discussion board if anybody's interested. The idea of, again, being able to adapt once we hear new information, which leads exactly into cognitive complexity. Cognitive means the way that we think, and the opposite of complex is simple. So when we're able to think in many different structures in many different ways, that is typically how we define communication competence. That we can change our minds. It doesn't mean that we're pushovers. It doesn't mean that we're wishy-washy. Maybe we're taking in some new information that we didn't know about. So in terms of this article, and again, you can click on anything in the PowerPoint and it will take you to different places. So this is an article from last year in New York Post, and it talked about how there was a woman who was taking food from Whole Foods. You might have heard the store is called Whole Paycheck. And the officer could have made a lot of choices in the moment. And rather than give her a summons or arrest her, what he and his partner actually did was buy her food. And it's interesting because we don't often see articles like that. So that officer even in the moment, in the snap decision, was thinking in a really cognitively complex way. If she was taking from a store that often had hot foods right